trade and investment in Russia, which is not really terribly central to, I would say, most of the members of the coffee club. However, since Elio has invited me to talk about it, I have agreed to do this. My main reason for belonging to the coffee club is really to identify some resources nearby to me that can help in my business. Most of the things like graphic design, web design, database building, telephone, cold calling, support work like that. So that's my motivation for belonging to the club. Unfortunately, everybody who joins gets a chance to make a speech, so this is the speech. A little bit about Russia relative to other countries. This is a list of the world's big trading areas by population. Obviously, China and India are the two biggest. The European Union follows in third, and so on. If you look by income, the European Union is far way ahead of anybody else. But if you look at this list of high income, or for high income members, it's the European Union, the USA, and the Russian Federation that appear in the top 10 most populous countries. So if you're measuring your market by the number of people, which tends to be the case if you say Unilever selling toothpaste, toothbrushes and soap, the number of people from the upper middle income and above is what's important. If you're selling higher value products, then it's the economic size, it's the European Union, USA, and Russia. But Russia is the nearest of these very big markets to the European Union, the nearest to the UK, so it's a very important target and with a lot of potential for growth. This graph shows Russia's trade with the world, and the top line, the green line, is Russia's exports, and the blue line, Russia's imports. And even in 2014, after the troubles in Ukraine began, after the price of oil halved, you'll find that Russia's exports hardly changed at all, essentially because as the price dropped, they pumped more oil. So they compensated for the falling price by increased volume, and the export sales expressed in dollars have stayed quite stable, which means that their imports are less than their exports. They still have a lot of money to spend on exports. The blue bars show their products, and essentially the ones that they're importing. I won't go into that. The numbers are too small. They're not showing it well on this, so I won't go into the body. But basically, most of the vehicles, machine tools, things of that sort. Certainly, as far as we're concerned. So who are Russia's trade partners? This is relatively faint. But the green one shows Russia's export markets. The top export market is actually Switzerland. And the reason for that is the legal owners of a lot of the oil are a firm in Switzerland called Gunvor. They are the legal owners of the oil that leave Russia. The oil never gets to Switzerland. They resell it to refineries in Germany or Bulgaria or Turkey as it's on its way. But legally speaking, Switzerland is the biggest export market. The second biggest one here is not elsewhere specified. Now, these figures are compiled, the figures I'm quoting are compiled by the United Nations. They look at what Russia says is exports and what the UK or other countries say they import, and there's a bit of a difference in the totals. In the case of Russia, it's so large, it's the second biggest export market, the untraceable export market. And the reason for this is that middle-sized Russian oil companies get taxed at 90% on the value of the crude oil they produce, about $35 a barrel. So, but there is a tax exemption if they export it. So a lot of middle-sized Russian oil companies try to register with the Russian Customs Service that they have exported a lot of crude oil, which may not necessarily arrive on the books of the UK or Germany or Switzerland or wherever that it was sent to. So that second green line probably represents the impact of the Russian mafia on their export trade, if we can call Russian mafia. And then the third line is the UK. And as you can see, the UK, along with Switzerland and the mafia, is much stronger as an export market for Russia than any of the other countries on that list. And we don't just, it isn't just the city of London buying and selling oil. We buy, or a huge, the Russians send a huge amount of gold and platinum and diamonds to the UK. And those are sold by the UK. And also, about half of that total is actually quite a diversified collection of industrial goods. We are actually one of the best markets for software, for units of metalwork, for satellite launches in the UK, commercial satellite industry, gets the satellites launched in Russia, and so on. But as a result, the UK is actually quite important, and you will hear a lot less criticism of the UK these days coming from the Russian Foreign Office than you will of the US, and a lot of that is the fact that UK is actually Russia's biggest or second biggest in most years trade partner, count in both directions. And then we have people like China and so on in the lower positions. So from the market for Russia, we are extremely strong, and the political diplomatic situation has, because of the history in the last 10 years of incompetence on both sides, become really rather strained. So it's damaging both parties now, and we find there's a lot of effort behind the scenes to smooth things over. It's not working very well yet. They're both still sticking their feet in it. But in particular, the Litvinenko case may not be very important economically or socially, but a lot of people in the security services on both sides made a lot of mistakes. In particular, a very senior person in the UK jumped to immediate conclusions which were wrong, and and it took a lot of time before he would lose face and admit it, and that muddied the waters in strict diplomatic terms. In terms of who sells to Russia, the leader there is Germany, by a very wide margin. In the next position, it's we've gone too far. The leader there is Germany by a very wide margin. You have Switzerland again for the same trading reasons that the oil company was involved, the oil business. And then you have China selling things like shoes, very low added value items. And again, in fourth position, still quite substantial, is the UK. In fourth position as providers of imported goods. And like Germany, the UK is not providing shoes and cheap clothing. The UK is providing jet engines and diesel engines and a lot of prime movers. We're very strong prime movers, and lot of those go to Russia. A lot of automotive components go from the UK. The electrical engineering equipment, particularly electronics and oil broadcast equipment. So we're an important supplier of much higher added value goods than the Chinese. Some Russian politicians talk a lot about an alliance with China, but in fact, China's not that big a trade partner in terms of anything of added value in either direction. So, here we have it. The road vehicles, which include the engines that you talked about, diesel engines, petrol engines in particular, power generating equipment. This is what they buy from us. Industrial equipment, these are big volume items, and we've got a very strong pharmaceutical industry, world-class pharmaceutical industry. About 90% by value of the pharmaceuticals sold in Russia are imported, and about half of those are imported from the UK. So the whole medical hospital sector is very dependent on continuing supplies from the UK. And it doesn't mean the aspirins that you buy across the counter are made in the UK, but what we do sell very high value drugs, anti-cancer treatments, heart disease treatments, and so on. So although the volume is small, the actual value is huge. So that there's another big section there on beverages. The Russians have quite a taste for whiskey. And if you go to that bar at the mall, there's a little bottle there. But the Russians reciprocate that with a taste for whiskey. We notice whiskey, quite a lot of beer as well. The biggest brewery in Russia was bought by Scottish and Newcastle breweries in the 1990s for a very low price. And everything was in shambles, and everything was quite cheap. Scottish and Newcastle cleaned the operation up a bit, started advertising. There were very favourable conditions because the Russian government was slamming down hard on spirit alcohols, high taxes, narrow windows of time in the day when you could buy vodka and so on. And as a result, the beer market took off. And although Scottish and Newcastle, their Russian business became 4 times as big as their UK business, it got too big for them to handle. They couldn't find the capital to expand the business as fast as it needed to be expanded anymore. So they sold that to Carling, who later sold out to Anheuser-Busch, the American firm. But that was a spectacular success story on the UK side, and that explains about half of that beverages as well. So we've done quite well in certain industries. The social note, this is a population pyramid. So the oldest people, the population of the oldest people is shown at the top. And what you have here are the populations on either side, the males to the left and females to the right. So it shows the number of people in any particular age category. And there's a baby boom going on at the moment, and has been going on since about the year 2000, and it's picking up and accelerating. And it continued, this is about 3 years old, the figures of this, but the baby boom has continued. So there's a lot of demand for children's clothing and so on. But what you see is these huge dips, and the huge dip at the top is the Second World War. Those are the people missing due to the Second World War. The second dip, obviously, are their children who are missing in the population. And the third dip coincided with the 1990s and the collapse in the economy and the Yeltsin. And that third dip is their grandchildren plus the 1990s. So there's this Russia's got this very uneven population structure. And what's happening is that bulge of the people who are just after 40, it's starting to leave the workforce a bit. People are being less economically active, and as a result, they're going to be short of about 10 to 15 million people over the next 10 years in the workforce. Now, they can replace that one of three ways. One is mass immigration, which is what the British and German and other European governments chosen to do. The other is by huge capital investment, but 100,000 workers, they need to get in $1.5 trillion just to stay in the same place. Investment, and the other one in the Russian case is by continuing to import, because of the imported goods will substitute for goods and services not actually made in Russia. But if they don't deal with this population shrinkage by one of those means, then there isn't anybody there to do work, and the standard of living will fall. I think that they'll probably continue to import, and they're trying very hard to increase their capital investment. So instead of clearing the streets when it's snowing, with people pay low wages with shovels and scraper boards, you now see bobcats with snow clearing brushes imported from Canada to clear the streets. Russia's full of all sorts of people doing very manual jobs we don't do anymore, ticket collectors on buses and so on. So there's a driver and a ticket collector. There are old ladies sitting in museums, the traditional Soviet image, or just sitting there all day with no apparent purpose and so on. There's a very big security industry, and the security guards are all human, not very much used to CCTV cameras and other electronic barrier technologies. So, for example, there's a firm in Newport which does car park management systems. We will have a very strong opportunity there. There's a firm in Wrexham who do access control systems, which all feed into this getting rid of these low productivity jobs, because then when you have people, then they need to invest to do that. And I think in terms of this audience, I think the rest of this is very relevant. It's all about how to introduce your business to Russia. We'll ditch that, but as an overview, as you saw from those figures about imports and exports, collapsing the price of oil hasn't done actually all that much damage. And in terms of internal issues, the price of oil has gone down, but the number of rubles that oil will buy has gone up. And as a result, expressed in rubles, the price of oil has stayed about the same. The amount of oil they've sold has gone up. So expressed in rubles, which pays the salaries of the school teachers and the policemen and the government officials and the army, they've actually got more revenue. The Russian government has actually got more revenue. As long as it's not expended overseas, they've actually got a stronger government presence. So there are a lot of infrastructure projects. So that I'll finish now. I'm happy to take questions, not just on business issues, but anything else you'd like to talk about. Thank you. I used to design computers, not use them. Data storage systems like disk drives and tape drives. Well, that was a business which in the UK sort of has been disappearing since about 1983, 1985, and peaked about then. And by the mid-90s, most of it had gone. I was offered a very good package to leave ICI, where I was working at the time. I'd been working on some kind of optical data storage. I'd come across a Russian firm which made extremely good lasers. So alongside an innovation consultancy, I did some work selling their lasers for them. And that was a connection. And that took me to a city about 500 miles southeast of Moscow. It was a closed city until about 3 or 4 months before I got there. So I was really conspicuous as a foreigner. But I worked with them, I made a lot of contacts, and then in the mid-2000s when when the dot-com bubble burst and there was no innovation consultancy going on in the UK at all, I decided I'd use those contacts to do another business, which was advice on importing into Russia. The selling the lasers was never a very big business, but there was some contacts in inside.
I've been listening to some of the UKTI webinars. It's almost as if Russia doesn't exist. It's all India, Germany, China.
Yeah.
But it's just not interesting with Russia.
Well, given what's going on, the official engagement is not good now. I say it started with the Litvinenko thing, where false accusations were made, and it just spiraled out of control after that from a diplomatic point of view. And I also have to say, I went with my Russian colleagues in the laser business to a conference in 2002, the anti-terrorist security. She was a very senior civil servant at the time. And there was a lot of talk then about Russia joining NATO, about Russian defense suppliers even supplying NATO armies, and a lot of cooperation. And my two Russians with me asked, well, what about some more cooperation on anti-Islamic terrorism? And it was clear that it had never occurred to them that to even think about this subject. And I think a lot of our security people spend an awful lot of time at hotels in America. They spend half their time in the US with NATO opposite numbers and the US security opposite numbers, and that does build a very American mindset around them. It's not always clear whether they work with the Americans or whether they work with the British government. I mean, she then later went on to head a firm called Kinetic, which was a spin-off of the Defence Establishment Research Agency, and she then ended up as she then became the Tory Minister on the security issue in the House of Lords. But she may be more for the female end, which is why I make it so much I think she's very typical of the people who were in the security establishment in the UK. They were still trapped in American Cold War images about the world.
Any more questions?
Okay.
What's your impression of Vladimir Putin?
I think he should have retired in 2012. Yeah, I think his first presidency in 2008, in domestic policy, he barely put a foot wrong. He didn't get everything right in foreign policy even then. But in domestic policy, he didn't put a foot wrong. And as Prime Minister under Medvedev, although he was really hanging on to the power, he didn't do such a bad job. But he got out of the office a lot. Most of the time he was traveling the country, visiting factories. And I think that messed him up a bit as well, because he is very much identified with Russian producer interests. So he's very nationalist on the producer's side. Medvedev is more consumer orientated. So Medvedev pulled in the head of the Russian Customs Service and said, why are you giving importers such a hard time? Prices are 25% higher in Russia because the barriers to at least getting your first shipment through are very high. They don't press so hard. While Putin, on the other hand, is sort of promoting Russian pig farmers and finding every opportunity he can to block the Danish pig imports, for example. They tend to have veterinary scares, so the Danes get 2 years of supplying Russia uninterrupted, then it goes to Canada. So they're getting their bacon, but they're not letting anybody get very established in that. And that's Putin's thinking on trade. Putin is a nationalist. I wouldn't call him a Mussolini. I'd call him a de Gaulle. He's a robust nationalist. There is no reason to think that the Russian elections are anything other than democratically held. My friends and colleagues in Russia all think at least the voting process, at a minimum, is completely above board and fair. There will be abuses. I mean, years ago, I stood for Parliament in Tidder, and the dead voted against me. But that happens everywhere. The enthusiasts on one side or another try something. But that sort of abuse, Russia's not free from. But there were no large-scale abuses. Elections are fair. Whether the likes of the British Green Party get as much access to the television stations as they would like is a debatable point. But the big opposition parties, the communists, and a party called the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, which is neither liberal nor democrat but a far-right nationalist party, they get a lot of airtime. Their leaders are on the television, weekend political debates pretty much every weekend. There are people the Americans like who get 3 or 4% of the vote, and the threshold to get into the Duma is 5%. And the Americans say that they are not given as much visibility as the communists, the LDP are. And that's true, but I mean they used to have a large percentage of the vote. At one time they had 14%, and they've fallen down to their 3 or 4% through their own efforts. They've not been targeted. They were heavily associated with Yeltsin and so on. I mean, what does happen? It is the United Russia, which is the dominant